Assalamu alaikum, dear students. We are doing reading section 1, and the topic of our today's class is funding a gap year. Now, this is a very new concept, a new topic that you might not have heard of. So, I feel it's really important to tell you and give you a little introduction about what a gap year means before we proceed to our main topic, that is how to fund it. Now, what is a gap year? A gap year is basically a break that's taken after school and before joining college. Usually, it is after school and before college life. Students take a gap year. It's ideally, generally, one academic year that they take and they explore themselves in this particular gap, in this particular gap. In simple words, you can say a gap year is basically a sabbatical, a long holiday, probably that students take to learn something new. Okay, they take to understand themselves better, they take to evaluate themselves, they sometimes take it to learn a professional skill maybe, or they take it to pursue a talent, or sometimes they take it to understand what they want actually in life, to set a goal. So gap years, children, are actually very important. This may not be a very common concept or very popular concept here in India, but yes, definitely abroad, many people, many famous personalities have also taken gap years. I'll state some examples later on, but here I'm reminded of a joke, you know, of a woman. Once she was traveling in a bus with her 2-year-old baby in her arms. And when she entered the bus, the driver gave her a very dirty look. And he said, "Oh, your baby is so ugly. I won't even charge anything for your baby. So you take him free. Take the bus ride free for your baby." The woman was definitely very offended. Definitely nobody likes to hear such things about their children. She was offended, but then she couldn't say anything and she sat down on her seat. Next to her was a man sitting, but because she was so offended and she was bursting with anger, she wanted to share it with somebody. And when she saw this man looking at her baby, she, kind of started complaining to him. She said, "The driver of this bus, he's so rude. He has no manners. When I entered the bus, he told me that your baby is so ugly." Can you imagine? Somebody can be so rude as him. That man just looked at her and he said, "You should just ignore such people. Don't pay much attention to such people. Some people just lack basic mannerisms. So just don't worry about him. Anyway, if you have difficulty, may I hold your monkey?" So sometimes people do not understand how to talk. Sometimes they do not, understand simple things of life. Either they are too stressed or they haven't understood life enough. Huh? So gap years, that's how gap years come in picture at times. Gap year is a beautiful way of releasing stress and also to learn things to your advantage. It's a very beautiful concept, and I used to tell my 10th graders last year that our syllabus, our board provides us an opportunity to take a gap year, because your exams get over in January and admissions start in July. So you have about how many months? Feb, March, April, May, June. You have about 5 to 6 months naturally in your hands. A gift from the board that can be utilized to, not just whiling away time and wasting time, but to learn something new, but to learn to understand yourself, but to learn to know what you want in life. Okay. So this board really gives you a good opportunity to do that. Well, jokes apart, I was talking about some very famous personalities who have taken these gap years, and the benefits are there for the world to see. We all know about Steve Jobs. He famously started Apple. He took about 6 months holiday, and he traveled to India, and he meditated in the mountains, and that's how his creative juices, I would say, started flowing, and we have the result to see. Then you have another example of J.K. Rowling. Her Harry Potter is world famous, and it happened during gap in her career. Also, you all know of Emma Watson, the famous Spider-Man actress, and she too took a gap year in her career to study about feminism and gender inequality and all that. Yeah, so people too, they do take gap years to sometimes pursue their hobby, or sometimes to learn some a professional skill, or sometimes to upgrade themselves. So these gap years have tremendous benefits, and we cannot rule out the advantages that they provide to us. By the way, don't get confused between gap year and holiday. Okay, holidays are different. Holidays are taken for the purpose. You can say holidays are related to luxury, while gap years are not like holidays. They are breaks taken between study time and between your career time. Yes, children? Okay. So now we have a topic, funding a gap year. Now, definitely, when you are, taking a break, you are traveling to some country, or you want to explore yourself, explore a new talent, uh, do some experiential learning. Everything comes with a cost. Yes, everything requires money. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to fund it? Students abroad, they fund their own gap years, either by doing some working for a voluntary organization, some charitable organization, doing some fundraising project. They fund their own gap year, they earn money, and that's how they go ahead with their gap year. We'll do today again one more passage for reading part 2. We've already done one last time, and this is the second one that we will be doing, so that you get enough practice. Yeah, so let's quickly revise what is reading part 2. As I say, your reading part 2 is a little longer text, and it could be either in the form of article, advert, leaflet. Yeah, so here we have it again in the form of an article, and the name of the article is How to Fund a Gap Year. Yes, you can see that you have to answer questions 11 to 25. That means 15 questions. And yes, as I said, there are always 15 questions, and it carries 15 marks. Last time I told you, I gave you a tip rather on how to save time. I hope you remember. What was the tip? I said you take the reading comprehension passage just like shopping your grocery. So you first do a little skimming of the passage, and you label the paragraphs, and then go to your shopping list, which is your questions, and then come back again to the market and look for the items. Here in this case, question, look for your answers in the passage, and that's what we are going to do now. Okay, but first, because I'm taking a class, I will go a little slow, and I'll try to explain each paragraph to you. You now know what a gap year is. So the first paragraph is talking about, what did I say? That you check the first line and the first sentence and the last sentence. That's how you go about it, right? But here, since we are doing a little explanation, we are not doing it that way, but you should do it that way. Okay, so the first paragraph, what does it entail? It talks about what a gap year is. So what is it? A gap year is simply a year or even less taken out of formal education. So it's not necessarily 1 year. It could be 6 months, 8 months or so also. For example, this may occur during the transition from your secondary school to sixth form of or college. Okay, so after school, like in your case, you may finish your 10th standard and then take one gap year, and then you resume college. It could even be taken after completing all formal education. So it can also be after you finish all the formal education and before entering the world of work. So when you finish, it may not necessarily be between your school and college life. It can also be between between completing your formal education and before taking any job or work. Okay, so some people do that, once they finish their formal education, if they feel they are not good in communication, so probably they pick up a course there and they work on their communication skills. Sometimes they are looking for a job which requires them to have a little extrovert personality, say suppose journalism, yeah, in television, that requires you to be a little more outspoken. So they pick up a course, and they try to develop their skill, develop that particular skill. So it's not necessary, children, that it's done only between school and college life. It can also be between between completing your education and your work and job. Okay. Yeah, so the first paragraph, how will we label it as? We will label it as what's a gap year? Okay. I hope you carry your books with you and notebooks with you when we are doing a lesson. This is regardless of whether I tell you or I don't. Let's come to the second paragraph here. What does the second paragraph talk about? Second paragraph talks about the reasons why some people are not able to take it. Look at the second paragraph. Every year, around 1 million people in UK say they would be interested in taking a gap year, but only a fraction end up taking one. Yeah. So then the paragraph talks about what is the reason why, when so many people plan to take, or they intend to, they want to, they wish to take a gap year, it's a very little portion of population that actually is able to take the gap year. What is the reason? The reason could be many. One could be that they are not able to cover the costs of the gap year. Okay, and that's the most frustrating reason people say is. Okay, so the second paragraph can be labeled as reason why people cannot take. Okay, let's move on to the third paragraph. Third paragraph is, what does the first sentence say? A year out, or that means gap year. Okay, a year out usually costs between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, depending on whether you travel, volunteer, or work, or do any of these in combination. So what's the general cost? It is 3 or 4,000. This can be a menacing amount for students who may already be snowed under with loans. So this passage is basically talking about the cost. Okay. And also it's suggesting that why you should not take a loan for taking a gap year, because so many students have already taken study loans and they are already in that burden. They already have that financial burden. So the paragraph is suggesting that it's suggesting that you shouldn't. Yeah, otherwise it's a great, you will land up into a greater debt. However, what's the last sentence? Choosing a gap year, which includes work as well as travel, gives you the added luxury of not having to cover all your costs before you go. So you can top up your funds by working during the year. So it's saying that, if you have taken a loan, you get little time to, fund these, and you get little time to cover up these costs by working, uh, by doing some voluntary work. So that's basically about the cost. And the next paragraph, what does it talk about? Lynn Black, an English literature student at the University of Exeter, spent 6 months working on a community project in Thailand. As a volunteer, you get board and lodging and a meager wage, but you don't need much to live quite comfortably. So this paragraph is probably giving one example. So whenever you have names, children, last time also I told you, you better underline those names, right? So if there's a question pertaining to this particular person, then you need not look in other paragraphs. You can only specifically look for your answer here in this particular paragraph. So we can say Lynn Black, and the paragraph can be labeled as example. We move on to the next paragraph, which says, there are countless examples of students using their initiative to think up ideas to raise the necessary funds. So many examples are there where students, have used their own creative ideas, how they can, fund their gap year, how they can arrange for the necessary funds to go on a gap year. What does it range from? They range from, so basically again, this can be labeled as examples to raise money, ways to fund a gap year. So this paragraph can be labeled as ways to fund a gap year. What are the different ways that students take? It can range from physically challenging, like swimming the distance of the English Channel or running a half marathon, to the ridiculous, like the girl who sat in a bath of cat food for an hour and managed to raise 1,200 pounds. Yeah. So it can be something very simple and funny, or it can be something which is quite challenging, either physically or mentally. Yeah? So it all depends on how creative you are, how enterprising you are, how intelligent you are, that you can think of a very unique idea to raise money for your gap year. But the passage is telling us that it's not an impossible task to do. Then we're talking about the next paragraph. What does it say? But the gains of fundraising for a gap year extend beyond the short-term advantages. Now we are coming to the advantages of funding a gap year. It is not just short-term, that you have learned a particular skill and you are able to fund your gap year. Is just, the advantage is just not restricted to this. The advantage is beyond short-term advantage. Okay, it's why it looks amazing on your CV. When you have taken a gap year and when you have funded it yourself, it is an added advantage on your CV. I hope you know what's a CV. Your curriculum vitae, your profile that you prepare when you intend to take up a job. Okay, and it's a brilliant thing to do. Williams said, if you go for an interview and it comes down to 2 people, the fundraiser will stand out. So it's actually not just for the short-term benefit that you're reaping, but it also goes a long way when you're looking for a job and it's there in your CV that you've taken a gap year and you have funded it. Then it really works for your advantage. You stand at an advantage when there is a comparison between 2 candidates. Let's stop here, and I am reminded of a joke here. You will say, Ma'am is very fond of telling jokes, but I feel humor is the best way to freshen up. Huh? I remember of a joke, this kind of a joke where gap year adds to the advantage on your CV. Okay, so it's a joke about one candidate um, and the interviewer. So in the candidate CV, it was mentioned that he had taken a gap year. And so the interviewer says, "Oh, I'm very impressed. You have taken a gap year to go to Yale. Hmm? It's a city, yes." So he says, "Oh, I'm so impressed. You've taken a gap year and you went to Yale." So the candidate says, "Well, thank you so much for your appreciation. That means I can assume that I've got a job." Did you get the joke? Hmm? So the candidate probably is cannot pronounce J. He pronounces J as Ye. So the candidate hadn't been to Yale, but he had been to jail, and that's why he's assuming that he'll get a job and not a job. Okay. Well, yes. So come back to the paragraph. The next one and the second last one. No, we have it on the other page too. Okay. So the next paragraph talks about raising money. Raising money in small amounts can seem demoralizing. Okay, not very encouraging. You're raising, you're funding small amounts, but it does build up. Okay, so you shouldn't get demoralized or demotivated, kind of, because it builds up. For example, a car washing business which cleans 10 cars a week at £3 a time makes 120 a month, over 1,500 in a year. The secret is not to try and get full funding from large multinational companies, but to get at least a meager amount here and there and build it up slowly. Williams explained, you need only 10 friends to sponsor you £10 for shaving your head, and you have 100 there. So simple thing. So for small expenses of yours, this is how your expenses can be met. So don't feel demoralized or don't feel demotivated that way. That also can be a good idea if you're raising money in small amounts. Well, let's move on to the next. Okay, so yeah, so this paragraph, what will you label it as? I'm leaving it to you. Now you label this paragraph. You may underline the key ideas also, the keywords, and label the paragraph. Move on to the next one. Mike Henry, a journalism student at Bournemouth University, spent some of his gap year in Belize after raising over £4,000. He worked full-time in a department store for 3.5 months and also used his initiative to organize some events. So what did he do? Took up a part-time job, full-time here, we are saying, but part-time if you consider it as in the duration of a year. Okay, and also he used his initiative to organize some events. I tried to think of some original things to do. I know someone who owns a restaurant, so I asked him whether he could help me do a cheese tasting night. We did it, and he let me keep the £600 profit, Henry said. So you can be very creative. You can come up with some very creative ways of funding money for yourself. Okay, let's move on to the last paragraph. Okay. Yes, and I forgot, you got to label it yourself. Yeah, so you label it. Some very creative ways. Next and the last one is gap years can cost as much or as little as you want. So don't think that, okay, it's a very expensive affair. It may not be a very expensive affair. It's your choice. The opportunities to raise the money you will need are there. So it's not that it's something which is impossible to do. Yeah, you can do it. The opportunities are there. So do not take out a loan for your travels. There's a suggestion. the passage. Please don't do that. Student money worries are big enough without adding further debts into the mix. So a gap year is feasible for all students. What you need to do is determination. You need the determination to raise the money. Okay. So by now, I think the concept is fairly understood by you. What a gap year is, we saw why it's required, why so many people have taken it, why so many people find it difficult, and whether can you take it or you cannot, whether it's a possible task or it's an impossible task. We saw all this in this passage. Sorry. So before we end this lesson, let's have a quick look at the questions. I told you in reading part 2, these are the kind of questions that you will get at the end of the passage. And yes, you have them here. You have to mark whether the statements are true or false or whether they are not given. So you got to choose the correct option. How will you do it? The instructions are given very clearly. And we have also taken this up in our previous class. All right, so I will not discuss the questions here. I'll just post these questions to you, and that's how you may go ahead. So do this question 11 to 15 and also questions 16 to 25. Okay, and once you finish, then I'll post the answer key to you. I hope the lesson is understood, and I hope I was able to keep up your interest. Thank you, children, and have a good day.